and has just a boat floating in it.
right? But if it's a landlocked lagoon, this is a much larger mystery
A little
to
bit.
me, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but, well, yeah. I mean, I don't even understand why somebody would take a tank and hammer it flat. That's a lot of friggin' effort. But I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here. But I mean, okay, I can see somebody taking the time and effort to drag a boat in. I can see them dragging their oars in. But cutting in half or mashing flat a copper tank is just a weird thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
I have a theory.
Okay.
But-
And I don't know, are we at theories yet?
We
or?
are at theories,
Okay.
but we're not at that theory yet.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I like jumping around in my stuff. I have, I think, 4 theories that I'm going to go through.
Okay.
One, the first one, the most romantic one, is that there was an actual shipwreck and there was an actual lifeboat that happened to find this island, and there were survivors that tried to live on the island and perished.
Of course, their skeletons were never found. Of course, who knows? Maybe the sea elephants dragged them into the water.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say there's no structures in terms of land mass that's of any kind that you could use for protection from the weather.
Yeah.
So
You'd have to
when
use
your
the boat.
bones rot away, they blow around.
Yeah, they probably would. And I got to tell you, that's that latitude is 54 degrees south, which is what we call the furious 50s.
Yeah, it's seriously
it's
ripping wind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've actually been to that latitude. It's Ushuaia, Argentina, which I spent several days in. It's almost the exact same latitude. And actually, in the summertime, it's pretty warm and nice. It's not as inhospitable as you would think at that
Yeah.
latitude, but the wind is ferocious.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
and there are a lot of problems I have with this theory, right? And granted, the tank pounded flat. It speaks of kind of a desperation that you want to attribute to people trying to save their lives. But there were no skeletons found. There were no signs of a camp. There were no signs of attempted forages. There's no signs of somebody trying to kill a sea elephant or anything like that.
Well, there's nothing there to burn besides the boat. So there's gonna be no signs of fire. If you kill one of those sea elephants, good luck, because they're massive.
Yeah.
But okay, let's say you steal a pup. Well, their bones are about the size of yours, and if these are ripping winds with massive waves, at some point, I can see that all being washed away. I don't see what other signs of quote unquote camp there would be.
Yeah.
Well, there can't be like campfires, for example. There's nothing on this island to burn.
No, it's ice and rock.
So here's my number one complaint with this whole thing is that anybody, well, in my mind, anybody who's in a survival situation, particularly with a lifeboat like this, knows that the way that you survive that situation is you pull that lifeboat up on shore and you make it your shelter. There are numerous, very well documented cases of people surviving for months.
Well, what
Like
makes you
very
think?
extended amounts of time.
What
in
makes you
this
think
boat.
he didn't do that?
Well, but that's right. Okay, so
Yeah.
and again, that's where it comes in. Like it depends on were there waves hitting this shore,
Well-
or is this like a fairly calm lagoon kind of area?
The wind, believe me, the wind down there is strong enough to take a boat like that and knock it over and push it around.
Right, but
Yeah,
so you
so-
assume that if they're using this as shelter, they found a way to secure it.
Yeah, probably. He's probably piling rocks around it and such. But eventually, when they're gone, the wind works it loose and flips it around, pushes it around. And then eventually,
But you would see those rocks.
The piles of rocks.
Yeah.
Probably. But they might have looked fairly random. They wouldn't have been right up against the boat by that point in time.
Well, let me. I know I'm jumping off the track here,
That's
but okay. So the island was quote unquote first officially discovered in the early 1700s, and there were whalers in that area for a couple hundred years. So wouldn't it be possible to follow your "I'm going to use the boat as my shelter" theory to say that? But let's say before this fallout area became this slide area happened, that maybe somebody had been using their boat as a shelter on the ice and then died there, and then when the ice crumbled because of this slush out, the boat was left behind and everything else was buried, because the boat is big enough it would bounce on top of the this landslide, it's light. Light things always kind of get pushed to the top. So
I don't know if a wooden boat is light.
compared to several ton rock,
Fair.
it's the lightest thing
I
of the
suppose.
bunch.
I suppose it's possible.
So you're thinking how far back?
I don't know, 1700s, 1800s. At some point, some poor schlub gets stuck on the island, like this theory is running with. But let's say I'm saying it's pre this area becoming established, and then when it all sloughs out, breaks away from the ice or whatever. I don't know. I'm spitballing here. So it could be older than people are trying to establish it as having come about.
Well, not necessarily that old though, because he also noted the presence of a 44-gallon drum, which is not something you're going to have.
You're right. You're right. I forgot about that bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to, as everybody is, grasping at straws
Right.
for the little bit that we've got.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I think about when I think about this, like, drum that's metal that's been pounded out, I think of somebody in the, kind of mid 60s, early 70s. There's planes flying around, maybe, trying to use it as an SOS signal
Like a
of
reflector?
some kind, or like a giant reflector.
Yeah, I
of
wondered
some
about
kind.
that.
That's a possibility.
I can see that, sure, but it's not my favorite theory.
Yeah.
It's a theory, but it's not a favorite theory. Another theory is the lifeboat just kind of lost at sea.
Torn off a boat.
Torn off a boat, just randomly happened to find this lagoon. Although, of course, that doesn't explain the oars and all that stuff on the shore. And also the highly improbability. And this is the other thing that I didn't really talk about with that first one. It's like we lost this island for a real long time. It's so remote that it seems really unlikely that somebody would just luckily happen upon it in a life-threatening situation, or
Seems unlikely.
or an unmanned boat would just happen to wash into this lagoon, right?
It's got to wash up somewhere.
The crap in the ocean floats up onto places all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. It's random happenstance, but it still happens.
It does. It's just it washes up on places that are like huge land masses, by and large. I mean, every once in a while you'll see a sand bar that's got a bunch of stuff washed up on it. But really, that's because the tides wash it. They pass right through there. This is not a place that is known or recognized as a high trafficked area by any means.
And the tides don't run through there to deposit
It's not like
stuff.
it's not like the western seaboard tides run through and deposit a bunch of stuff, because it's a lone incident. So the odds of some like sad souls on a lifeboat and life-threatening situation washing
Or an
up
unmanned
here,
lifeboat,
or
yeah.
an unmanned lifeboat seem fairly low. And again, I come back to the whole, I can't 100% tell, because I've looked at the Google Earth images of this place and I can't see a lagoon of any kind.
I saw the lagoon on the Google
You did?
research. Yeah, but
And I
it's
couldn't-
pretty small.
And I couldn't tell if it's landlocked or attached to the sea in any way.
If I was looking at the right lagoon,
Yeah, and that's the
then
other
it was
thing.
not attached to the sea.
Well, and the other
Yeah.
problem is I don't remember when, but it was only fairly recently that they got the first full aerial photo of the entire island without clouds.
Yeah.
Because it is always socked in at some portion of it with clouds.
Yeah.
Just because that's the way the weather is in that area.
Yeah. So the next theory, the third theory, is my favorite theory. It's that it's the remains of a fairly undocumented landing party that did an expedition to this island or landed on this island, whichever.
Could be.
So, the theory goes that a landing party used their lifeboats to dock in, right? Which you kind of would if you had lifeboats like this.
Yeah,
There's a high possibility that you could reattach them to your ship.
of course. Yeah.
That's fine. Well, and current kind of commercial ships don't have that capability. Once you abandon ship, you've abandoned ship. But there used to be, and I think as late as like the 80s and 90s, and maybe still today, there are ships that you could, like send a docking party out or a landing party out in your smaller ships
Yeah, your small boats.
come
Yeah,
back.
that's they're tenders.
Right.
That's what they are. So,
Yeah, that's what
yeah.
whaling ships used to
Yeah.
do all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So they would be tenders.
I would
and
think that in recent, I guess actually no, this was back in the early '60s. I was going to say they would be using Zodiacs, but I keep forgetting. Yeah, it was back in like early '60s.
Yeah. So
wooden boat.
the theory
Okay.
goes that a landing party of whaling ships from wherever went by the island and thought, there's an island. Let's go check it out. Dropped two boats, landed. One of them got a little bit ruined in the landing party. They went around, they explored. They realized there was nothing really there. And then decided, well, this boat is damaged, so we'll just leave it here and we'll all pile back in this other boat, go back to the ship and be on our merry way.
Sure.
I like this theory for a number of reasons. One, it explains how the boat got there.
Yeah.
It explains why it's there. It explains why there's no sign of camp or anything like that. I also think, and I didn't see this anywhere, but in my mind, it explains why a tank may have been pounded out, because it seems as though that could have been a potential attempt to repair the ship in some way. To say, or the boat, to say, well, let's just see if we can jerry-rig it real quick. Oh no, that's not working. Okay, or it's not worth our time, or the weather's coming in, or whatever. Okay, we'll just leave it. We'll all pile back into this one boat that's
Some
not
kind
damaged.
of makeshift plating to
Yeah,
fill a
just
hole.
kind of like throw it on the
and see if we
inside
can
of
seal it. We hit it in the water, open, pop right out. Screw
Nope.
that, we're out of here.
Yeah, I don't-
exactly. And then you
Yeah.
just
I don't think
go
that
back.
I don't think that would have solved their problem.
I don't think it would have solved their
But,
problem either, but I think that it's a possibility to just be, like on shore, kind of like troubleshooting the problem, then think, never mind. All right, well,
Yeah.
I'll just pile back into this boat. We'll leave it here, go on their merry way.
But-
Nobody reports to Norway or
Yeah, or whoever.
wherever that says we landed on this thing and we left a boat here.
But
Say, oops, we
before
lost
they,
a boat.
But
Yeah.
before they leave, they, and this is the fundamental clue as to who did it. They drag the boat to that lagoon and they put it in.
Right,
Well,
and
that-
again,
that's a practical joke, and this tells us who it was. It was the Russians. The Russians, they had that kind of sense of humor.
True. So, and that's attached to, I don't totally 100% know the situation of this lagoon. I mean, truly, all of the geographic maps that I've seen, all of the Google Earth images that I've seen, I don't know what Google Earth images you were looking at, but I didn't see a single lagoon in any of them. I saw a bunch of kind of, alcoves in the shore of the island, but I didn't see any lakes or anything like that. And I may have just missed it or whatever. But so I don't have a good satisfying answer of, is this a landlocked lake, lagoon, whatever, or is this just a inland?
An inlet in the sea. No,
Yeah.
it's like so there was somebody actually made a map of that little peninsula, and it showed the location of the lagoon. And then
That's what I thought,
And then
but-
you'll spot a dark spot on the Google Earth image. You'll spot in that
Interesting.
in roughly that location.
So I guess then we go back to why is it there? And then there's the fourth theory, which is of course that perhaps it never existed. Although
Photoshop.
there's a-
Seriously, that's what
Photoshop.
he photoshopped.
It would have been a really good Photoshop because there is photographic evidence. It turns out that Alan Crawford is the only person to have ever mentioned this.
Oh, really? So even though
Yeah.
there were a bunch of them there, he's the only person.
He's the
who's
only
talked
person.
about
He
it.
wrote a book about it, and then the scientific survey that went back, however, 2 years later, didn't mention it. And again, they were studying the lagoon, and they said it was shallow, but I don't know how extensive their study. I don't know if they went out to the middle and stepped in it and said, "Oh yeah, it's super shallow," or if they just said, "Oh, it looks pretty shallow." Probably fine.
They threw rocks in it.
Yeah.
Just like, the deeper it is, the more it kerplunks.
Yeah, I have no idea. Again, there are a lot of big question marks attached to this one, which is, of course, what makes it an unsolved mystery, which is why
Of course.
we're talking about it.
Well,
Yeah, I never was able to actually track in on which theory I thought was best, and it's because of the fact that there's one mention.
Yeah.
If there was documentation in the logs or from other people besides this one guy, and if that initial crew had spent more than 45 freaking minutes
Yeah.
on the island, I could give it more credence, but I don't because it's so wishy-washy.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's an interesting one. And by the way, this was a listener suggestion. It was suggested by Tarkin. I probably have just butchered your name.
Sorry, Tarkin.
I greatly apologize.
Send us an email. Tell us how to
Yeah,
pronounce
would
your
you
name.
give me a
If we
pronunciation guide? Because
mispronounce it. Yeah.
I can't figure out how to say your name, but it was a listener suggestion. And it was a great listener suggestion because I had actually never heard of again, I keep saying, although at this point I think maybe more times than not I'm saying, I say that I know a lot of unsolved mysteries, but I never heard of this one. I think at this point I need to shelve that response because at this point...
And actually I feel a bit foolish now as I just realized that the Sarah Joe was also a listener suggestion. Mm-hmm. And for the life of me, I didn't write down who suggested it. I don't remember who it was at the moment. So, oops. Bad Steve. Bad Steve.
We'll figure it out later.
I guess it's Joe's turn at this point.
Yeah.
Unless you guys want to talk more about...
Speaking of creepy, scary boat mysteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can round us off on creepy, scary boat mysteries.
So I'm going to talk about another boat. This one did not end up on an island. What I'm talking about, of course, the MV Joyita. MV standing for, I believe, merchant vessel. Also known as the Mary Celeste of the Pacific.
This is why you picked this. You love the Mary Celeste.
I do.
It's his favorite.
Any ship or boat found that's everybody's gone. It's just cool. Before we go any further, this was suggested by Ben, our listener. This was on my radar already because if you go out to the web and you find one of those web pages that's the 10 creepiest, weirdest ghost ships ever, this one's usually on it with Joyita.
Well, perfect. So this entire short episode is a listener suggestion. I like this.
Yeah.
Listener suggestions.
I didn't even realize that these were all listener suggestions. But I like that.
Boats.
Okay. All right. So let's get down to our mystery here.
Okay.
So this starts in October 1955. So about 5 a.m. October 3rd, the Joyita Celeste left Samoa, northbound for the Tokelau Islands, which were about 270 miles. Well, still are actually. I don't think they've moved apart, but 370 miles away. There were 25 people on board. That included 16 crew and 9 passengers, which I think is a little strange when you think about it. That's the first part of our mysteries. Why so many crew? This boat was about 70 feet long. That's a mystery.
Well, it's all about the money. The owner was trying to get extra cash
by paying his crew.
No, by having extra passengers to ferry around.
I'm not mystified by the passengers. I'm just wondering why he needed 16 crew.
Oh, okay.
So it was a captain. The captain's name was quote unquote Dusty Miller, and his first mate. I won't bother with the names because you people are going to forget him anyway. So Dusty Miller, his first mate, Mr. Simpson, and a whole bunch of other guys, and 9 passengers. One of the passengers was a doctor who was heading up there to perform an amputation. So he had his little black bag with him. Anyway, so they steamed out of the harbor in Samoa, and the people were, needless to say, never seen again.
Are we going to talk about the fact that they left a day late?
Oh yeah, they did leave a little bit late. Not quite a day late. They were going to leave late the night before, and then they wound up delaying because the clutch went bad on their port side engine. So
they were running on one engine.
Yeah, they wanted to try and find some parts. They couldn't find some parts, and so they decided to leave at the tide at 5 a.m. on just one engine.
Okay.
Yeah, always a bad idea. And by the way, another thing that's always a bad idea is just getting on one of these ghost ships to begin with. Somebody says, "Hey, you want to go for a ride on my ghost ship?" You just say, "No." Hell no. Okay, so they left on one engine. Her cargo consisted of this boat was not just a tour boat or anything like that. It was a cargo boat. Her cargo was medical supplies, some timber, 80 empty 45-gallon oil drums, and food. And I assume they were taking food up there for resale to the Tokelau Islands, because apparently the Tokelau Islands are even smaller and more isolated than Samoa. It was supposed to take between 41 and 48 hours. In other words, a 41-day, 48-hour cruise. We were all off key.
It was the most natural thing we've ever done.
Yeah, okay.
Wow, my singing career is tanked now.
People don't download our episodes for the singing. That's for sure.
God.
True.
Yeah, so anyway, so the Droita was scheduled to arrive on October 5th. Of course, they didn't show up. So on October 6th, they sent a message reporting the ship was overdue.
The port they were supposed to land
The port
in,
that
right?
they were supposed to land in
Okay.
reported them overdue. Nobody reported hearing any sort of distress signal from the crew. And there's a reason for this. Turns out their radio antenna had been disconnected. They didn't know about it. Search and rescue mission was launched, and from 6 to 12 October, planes from the New Zealand Air Force searched an area roughly 100,000 square miles of ocean and found no sign of the boat or the people. 5 weeks later, November 10th, the merchant ship Tuvalu sighted Droita more than 600 miles west of her scheduled route. That would be somewhat north of Fiji, I think northeast of Fiji.
Mm-hmm.
It was partially submerged, listing to port. There was no trace of any of the passengers or crew, of course. 4 tons of cargo was missing, and they also noted the radio was tuned to 2182 kilohertz, which is the International Marine Radio Telephone Distress Channel.
So obviously somebody was trying to get a hold of help.
Yeah, it turns out that, and this was discovered later on during the inquiry, is that there was a break in the cable leading to the external antenna, and apparently the break had been painted over at some point, and so it looked like it was intact, but actually no, they weren't really.
Nobody
there were a
realized
lot
it.
of kind of iffy things going on
Well,
with this ship.
this was not the most well-maintained ship.
Yeah.
I mean, for like obviously it's a little risky taking off to sea with only one engine working. Although when you think about it, I guess his plan was that if the starboard engine quit, then you could always dismantle the clutch and fix the port engine clutch and get it working.
Yeah,
So maybe that
at
was
sea
the
you
plan.
can make repairs.
But there were some other problems too. Like for example, they had bilge pumps, like all boats do, and these ones didn't have screens on the ends of their intakes, and so the bilge pumps became clogged. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This was discovered later when they actually got the boat back to port and started examining it. They discovered that the cooling intake, the cooling water intake for the sea, for the starboard engine, was a galvanized pipe. It rusted through and it started leaking. And so
this
the
was
boat
this was a fairly old ship at this point, right?
yeah, it was like, well, it wasn't that ancient. I think it was built in 1931.
Yeah,
something like
I mean,
that.
I'm not
it was
saying
20
it was,
years old, though.
right?
Yeah.
20,
and
25 years
and
old.
it had
at the
served
time.
in the war.
Yeah, it served in World War II.
And that it had seen some time. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
the
And
sort
a
of
number
thing
of
that you
owners.
Would,
Yeah.
and that you would expect that perhaps if it were going to continue to operate, that like these things would have been replaced. They would have, would have been rebuilt or whatever. But that for whatever reason, that those things had been overlooked.
Yeah, and it turns out, as we all know now, galvanized pipe used to be all the rage, and now we know that it kind of rusts through. And so this
Yeah.
is
Well,
galvanized pipe.
And what's sad is when this boat was originally built, it had brass pipe. But at some point in its refitting, I think the U.S. Navy refitted it when they took it over for World War II. They stripped the old piping and replaced it with galvanized because galvanized was better.
Supposedly. Yeah,
And
turns
so
out not.
then maybe if they hadn't done that, this might not have happened.
Right.
Quite possible.
Or if they'd put, copper.
Or brass, copper or brass back in,
Well,
we would
yeah.
have this issue.
There
But-
were shortages during the war.
But that wasn't the only problem.
No.
With the ship.
No, not at all the only problem. When they got the Droita back to harbor and looked her over carefully, they discovered the hull was sound. There were no holes in that, but they immediately discovered that leaky pipe, which had rusted through, as we said.
Galvanic corrosion. Isn't that when you've got different types of metal within a loop? And that, one type of metal, like the offcast from like a copper loop, for instance, right? If you've got copper and galvanized steel.
I believe so,
The
yeah.
copper corrodes the galvanized steel. The little particles from each of them corrode the other, and it just kind of becomes...
It's a weird chemical reaction.
Yeah.
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 That's my understanding. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, so back to our story.
Sorry.
So the crew would not have known about this leak until the water rose above the floorboards of the engine room. So by that time, it was really too late. The whole thing is underwater, and getting to it to plug it would have been pretty much impossible.
With the leak, right?
Yeah, getting to the leak
Yeah.
to plug it. And as noted previously, the bilge pumps did not have strainers on their intakes, so they got clogged and stopped working. So they kept taking on water.
But
It
it's
was-
my understanding of the construction of the hull of the ship, maybe I'm jumping ahead, that it was even more unsinkable than
Yeah, it
than
was.
the ship that Steve
The
was
Sarah
talking
Joe.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was.
It was cedar.
Well, it was 2-inch thick cedar planking. It was which is what
And
it was
then it
built of. And then the hold, at one point, they decided to refrigerate the hold, so they lined it with cork to insulate it.
So it
which
was
is also
literally
very-
unsinkable.
Yeah, and also on top of that, as I mentioned previously, they were carrying 80 empty barrels, empty
Which are
oil
full of
barrels.
air.
They're full of air, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the boat was unsinkable.
Now this is saying that those were sealed, and so
Uh-huh.
they would hold the air, not just open.
Yeah, and I would assume they would have been sealed because they're transporting them for a purpose.
I would
and they're
assume
useless
so,
for them
too.
to have them plugged.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah, yeah.
So it only makes sense that these things were sealed up. But even without that, the boat was still more or less unsinkable.
Right. So, and
Yeah.
it was taking on water, but it was unsinkable.
Yeah, but
Okay.
nonetheless, it's still a stressful situation. Well, anyway, let me talk a little bit about the damage here, though, that they found. There was damage to the superstructure. The boat had a flying bridge, which apparently had been torn away.
What's a flying bridge? Sorry.
It's kind of
It's
it's a cabin that's open at the back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Oh,
it's on
yeah.
top of the
Oh,
regular
okay.
on
Yeah,
top of
yeah.
the regular bridge. You know, it's like you see a lot of those, and they're for fishing boats and stuff. You get a lot of height, so you can spot the fishies from further away
Sure,
and
sure,
stuff
sure.
like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
But apparently, it had
but
been,
it's not always enclosed.
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes
often-
they are, sometimes they aren't. But it's up high.
yeah. Often it's just like a platform with a windscreen and an extra steering station, and then the awning over
Maybe
it
a
is just
roof
like
for an awning for a roof.
Yeah, it's open like an awning or something like that. So that had been torn away. Most of the windows had been broken. Somebody had rigged a canvas awning on the top of the deck house behind the bridge, which makes sense. It's hot and you want more shade, I assume.
Sure.
An auxiliary pump had been rigged up in the engine room.
I'm sorry.
Between-
The canvas awning, was it intact when they found the ship, or?
It appears to have been.
It was
pretty much
intact, it wasn't, like-
It wasn't shredded or anything
Oh,
like
okay.
that. No.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's there's some images of it, and you can see that it's still in place. You can see the damage to the flying bridge, and it's significant, but it's not as if it was torn away.
Yeah, it's curious to me.
Yeah,
Well, it
I just thought that it was worth noting that part of it had been torn away, but other parts were undamaged.
yeah,
and that appeared to be from waves,
Sure.
yeah.
heavy
It
seas,
is-
essentially.
Yeah, it's a little odd to me that the temporary awning that they had rigged up was more or less intact. You know, and so much of the damage had been done. That's kind of interesting. But anyway, back to the story here. So they had rigged up an auxiliary pump in the engine room between the two engines, but it was not connected, which would indicate to me that the starboard engine probably quit right about when they were ready to connect it. Because obviously you're taking
Using
on water.
the engine to run the pump.
Yeah, I'm assuming that this probably wasn't a power takeoff kind of situation from the engine. It probably was an electric pump, right? And so as long as they had electricity, which they got when the motor was running, then they could run that thing. But when the motor stopped running, well, no juice and no auxiliary pump.
Sure.
So yeah, they were kind of hosed. So as I mentioned, the boat was listing, and it was semi-submerged. It was you've seen the pictures. It was listing
Yeah.
very heavily. The barnacle growth on the outside of the hull above the usual waterline showed that it'd been in that position for a considerable amount of time.
At least weeks.
Yeah, at least.
Barnacles don't grow like crazy fast.
I don't know. I have no idea how fast they grow. Somebody
Well,
do a
I mean,
Google on that.
it took a number of weeks
It was about-
for them to find the
It was
boat,
about 5 weeks before they
and
found the boat.
so there was enough growth in that couple of week period for it to be recognizable.
Yeah.
So that gives you some frame of reference of their speed of growth.
What else? They had a dinghy with like a tender, and also what they call Carly life rafts, also called Carly floats. Well, and these are like non-inflatable life rafts. The military used them like in World War II.
They're kind of hard plastic.
No, they're not hard plastic. What they are is there's a central core that's formed in an oval. And the central core is made up of either a copper tubing or sometimes steel tubing, and it's like 12 to 20 inches in diameter. And it's formed in a big oval, just like a regular inflatable life raft would look, right? And then that's covered with cork on the outside for additional buoyancy, and then that's all covered with canvas, which is then sealed with paint and stuff like that. And then it's got like a mesh floor. Yeah, there you go. Devin's showing us a picture right
Sorry.
now. So
I'm the Google freak during
Okay,
this,
so
yeah.
if anybody has ever watched, I swear you've watched Jaws, right?
No.
And they kind of do a discussion of when all the guys were floating in those boats and the sharks were coming along. I swear
the Indianapolis.
And they kind of did a bit of a filming of the scene. Am I confusing that with something else where they showed those boats and they showed how they had that kind of net flooring to them?
Yeah, some of them had like lattice, like wood slat flooring.
Yeah.
And some of them had a mesh sort of flooring.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. But so they had 3 of those. All those were missing, which would suggest that they took to the life rafts at some point and abandoned ship. But of course, that doesn't really make a lot of sense because, as we all know, the boat was unsinkable.
We know.
Yeah. And the Carly life rafts. I'm sorry, excuse me if I'm wrong here, but those are the kind of life rafts that are like stored. They inflate. They have the canister attached to them, and they only inflate.
No, these are not inflatable.
They're always inflated.
Yeah.
And the dinghy as well, always inflated.
The dinghy was a wooden dinghy, like the one that we
so they
found on
weren't
your
things
island.
that would have only been seaworthy if there was an emergency, like if you inflated them yourself. So they could have just been washed off if there had been that.
I'm assuming they were pretty carefully lashed down, but they could have been broken loose and washed off. But
okay.
I would say that somebody took them either to abandoned ship or else somebody else came along maybe after the fact, found the boat floating and thought, well,
absconded with them.
Yeah, we'll just
life vests?
grab a few things. There not enough life vests for everybody. They had them, but not enough for everybody.
Sorry, I may have been Googling while we just covered that.
Oh, you were, huh?
Sorry.
Yeah, let's see what other mysterious things. The starboard engine was covered by a mattress.
That's so weird.
Well, yeah, one of the theories about that is that as the water level was creeping up, the flywheel and the belt on the starboard engine was flinging up water onto the electrical panel, and they might have wanted to cover it so that it stopped from wetting down the electric panel. So that's one possibility.
But a match, like they didn't have.
Well, you're not. That's probably the closest thing that they had. But a mattress.
Especially if it's full of water already.
Yeah, you're thinking of like a Sealy Posturepedic, and I'm not talking. This is like a sea mattress, like.
I've
the one that's a couple of feet wide and 6 feet long. And
I've lived on one of those for a while.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's one of those guys.
It's still weird to me that would be what they would use. But I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah. And as I said, the radio was disabled, and so it's estimated the range of the radio was about 2 miles, and so they were broadcasting a distress signal, undoubtedly.
That nobody could hear.
That nobody heard, yeah. Quite sad. The electric clocks on board had stopped at 10:25, switches for the cabin lighting and the navigation lights were on, which indicates that power finally was lost at night. And I'm not sure if I believe this. What I've heard in the standard accounts is that everything was wired directly into the ship's generator, the lights and the clocks and everything. But I find that hard to believe.
Why?
You'd wire this to the batteries. For example, do you want your clock shutting off every time you turn the engine off?
Oh.
Yeah. It should go to the battery. And the same thing with the lights. You should have the capability of running your nav lights even if your engine's out.
Sure. All right, that's fair. Yeah.
So a lot of people said, oh, this indicates that whatever cataclysm happened to them happened at night. Not necessarily. It just means the battery finally ran down at night.
Sure.
So that's all it means.
Although the lights switched on does indicate something happening at night, right? You don't turn the lights on if it's broad daylight.
Yeah.
Much.
No, you have the lights on at night. So
Sure.
obviously they finally lost all their juice sometime at night. Yeah. Let's see what else. The logbook, the sextant, their chronometer, and also Dusty Miller, the captain, kept a few guns on board. All that stuff was gone. And they also found the doctor. Remember I said there was a doctor on board?
Yeah.
They found his bag on the deck, and it had a stethoscope and a scalpel and some blood-stained bandages. That was it. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to the rest of his stuff. Maybe it got washed overboard. If you're going to go perform an amputation, you would think you'd need more than a scalpel. Unless you're
expecting them to have that on site.
Well, maybe, yeah. You'd think you'd have more in a doctor's bag than a stethoscope and a scalpel, though.
I thought part of the cargo were medical supplies.
Yeah,
so
they were medical
you would just
supplies.
keep smaller medical supplies in your bag.
It could be that he had
And then a larger
stowed some of
crate.
that stuff in the supplies.
Yeah, or something
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
it's entirely possible. But still,
You don't really, like a bone saw doesn't really actually fit.
Yeah, probably not, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you still think you've seen those black doctor's bags. You can fit a lot more than a stethoscope and a scalpel in there. For Christ's sakes. So anyway,
And
I would at least.
necessarily don't really keep blood-stained bandages.
No,
You
not
usually
necessarily.
Keep clean ones.
Yeah.
Just throw
Maybe
that
he
out
was into
there.
recycling. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah. And last of all, there was fuel in her tanks, and they calculated from the amount that had been used that she had gone about 243 miles before the engine shut down. That was probably roughly 50 miles short of their destination of Tokelau.
Ugh.
Yeah, I know. So the leak had probably started about 9 p.m. or so on the second night of the trip.
Yeah, so I guess the thing, like, okay, and I have been really pushing against doing this all night. This whole, like, well, I lived on a ship for 6 months, so I know everything about...
Well, you are a resident nautical expert.
I am. But one of the things, and I don't know in situations like this how long the 16 crew members had been with this ship or how often they did this run or anything like that. We did a run fairly frequently. And one of the things, like, within the first week, they drill into your brain is, like, assuming we're going at our normal speed, this is about where we are at any given time. And in your cabin, you have a little map of that. So if you wake up and the ship isn't moving, and, like, for whatever reason... It's a huge ship, right? It's not like this is going to happen to me, like, definitely not part of the captain's circle. I don't work on the bridge, anything like that. But if, like, the first mate woke up and was like, wow, that's super weird, we're not moving anymore, and walked onto the bridge and mysteriously everybody was dead or something, super suspension of disbelief story, that person could say, all right, it's about this time. We are probably about this distance away from the closest land mass. I can know that. So, for me, for them to say, well, they were about 50 miles away from their destination, assuming that they had done this run a couple of times, the thing that, like, gets me is that, like, they were super close. Like, 50 miles away from your destination is, like, close enough to abandon ship and paddle your way over there.
Certainly, yeah. No, and that's, it definitely is.
And that's the thing that, like, again, like...
I don't know how strong the currents were in that neighborhood.
Sure, of course. But, and that's the other thing is that, but just that it would be, like, hopefully the crew would know